Hi guys, Jen Gamuka here. For a final presentation, I have decided to look into and examine the women's roles during the American Revolution. There are a lot of women that I could have selected for this presentation for my paper, but I decided to narrow it down to three. I'm going to be talking about Mary Draper. I'm going to be talking about Deborah Sampson and Abigail Adams. Let's begin our discussion with taking a look at this image. This is an image that many of you are probably very familiar with, and it is titled Aunt Nancy Hart Captures the Tories. The idea that women were somehow powerless, somehow unable to defend their homes or their patriotic beliefs during the American Revolution is a common misconception. Women fought for the Revolutionary War, and they fought in different capacities. This patriotic duty and this sense of patriotism was extremely strong among the women. They didn't just sit at home, support their husbands and ignore the violent battle that was taking place in their backyard. These women did what they could to contribute to the war effort. And while women's participation in the American Revolution looks different than men, it is still very important to the success of the colonies in gaining their independence from Great Britain. Three ways that I'm going to look at the contributions, or I should say, three types of contributions that these women's made. First, we're going to look a little bit about how they participated in the fight from the home front, how they entered battles as soldiers, and then how they fought in those political arenas. And again, I'm looking at these three very strong women within this. On the home front, we're going to look at Mary Draper. She had a very important role whenever it came to the Revolutionary War. She is famous for her effort to assist the Continental Army. She offered them food, hospitality, clothing, and ammunition. Now, I found it interesting that while I did my research on her, I had some conflicting views that I found. The source that I found to be the most reliable is listed below here, and it is by Elizabeth Elliot. And within this text, she notes that Draper sent her husband and eldest son off to war. This eldest son was 16 years old. Other sources stated that she had been widowed before the Revolutionary War really got started. I have a tendency, and after doing a lot of research, to believe that she sent her husband, off to war with that eldest son. And Captain Draper, he served in Massachusetts. Mary, she stayed at home with her one son and daughter. And she kept the younger son home so that way he could help protect them just in case anything happened. This war was fought in literally their backyards. So they wanted, some form of protection from the looting and possible dangers that were associated with it. Mary and her two children set up a roadside stand. She handed out bread and cheese and even cider for soldiers as they marched by. She knew that whenever soldiers carried their own stash, it helped relieve pressure on private funds to really support this war. After Bunker Hill, she knew that ammunition was scarce. General Washington actually asked for lead and pewter to be melted down and made into ammunition. Mary, she had a large amount of pewter, and it was a gift, an inheritance gift from her mother. She literally stripped it off the walls of her home to have it melted down. Now, this is interesting because during this time, a woman's worth really correlated with their dowry, with their inheritance, with the amount of money that they brought into a relationship. And she never hesitated that, it was taking away from her worth. She just knew she needed to contribute to the Continental cause. She wasn't satisfied with simply melting down all this pewter she had. She took her platter pans, her dishes, and had those sent away to be melted down for ammunition. Mary went further to actually strip the bedding from her home and turn these blankets and sheets into shirts so that way they could keep. The winter months were very cold, and she wanted to do anything that she could to make these men more comfortable. Women contributed in many different ways. From the home front, Mary Draper, she is not an isolated incident. Many women during the American Revolution were contributing in any way that they could on the home front. Soldiers. Deborah Sampson is a very interesting case to look at, and a very interesting woman. She is known for actually donning men's clothing and entering the Civil War as a soldier. She has a very interesting upbringing in the sense that she came from a very prominent family of descendants. Let's put it that way. On her mother's side, she was the great-granddaughter of William Bradford. And then on the other side of the family, we see that she is the descendant of somebody who actually arrived on the Mayflower. These families had a good bit of money. They're pretty prominent. But then comes Deborah Sampson's parents. And they came on a streak of bad luck. They lived in poverty. And Deborah's father actually, the early sources say that he died in a ship accident. He went abroad and never made it home. Later information points to abandonment. He has, after abandoning his family, there's records of him where he went and started life over with a different family. Either way, he left Deborah's mother. Deborah's mother was poor. She had children. She had to start sending them out into the world to make a living. And Deborah, she was sent into an indentured servant situation with the Thomases. And she worked there until she was about 18 years old. When she was 18, she got out of the indentured servant position, and she wanted to go explore. And she knew there were limitations on her as a woman, and this was written about in her biography by Man. That is, again, listed below here, the female review. It's also in my bibliography. That I have it at the end here, and I will be attaching it whenever I submit this. But Deborah went to see a fortune teller, if you will, and he told her that perhaps the best way you could travel and get what you want out of life was to disguise yourself. Deborah at first thought this was kind of ridiculous, but before she made it home that day, she had already decided that she was going to dress as a man and she wanted to travel to Philadelphia. This was in the winter of 1781, and she was sewing instead of being able to travel to Philadelphia because of the winter. She had to put her trip on hold, and she began sewing herself a coat, a waistcoat, and pants that of a man. Right then is when she decided that she was going to enlist as a soldier, and she did so successfully. In 1782, Sampson decided to join the American Revolution. Now, there is some debate over what year she actually joined the revolution, but I have a tendency to believe the biography that was written. She helped contribute to that. I think she's, the best primary source that we probably had on her. But she decided that she was going to dress as a man, name herself Robert Shirt Left, and she went and joined Captain George Webb's company, and this was the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. When she joined this regiment, she was actually assigned to light infantry. So what that meant is she carried lighter packs than other people because she was getting sent into more dangerous situations to scout. She was in the middle of the battle. At one point in time, she suffered a gash to the head and she was actually shot in the thigh. She was so fearful that someone would figure out her true identity that she actually removed that bullet from her thigh on her own. It wasn't until she got sick during an epidemic almost 2 years later, a year and a half later, that they discovered she was a woman, and it was because she passed out because she had such a high fever. She had honorable discharge from the military, and later she marries, and her husband, he actually is going to file for pay of a soldier's spouse. And this is actually going to come before Congress, and Congress is going to note that there was no better, and I'm paraphrasing here, so please forgive me with this, there was no better example of female heroism during the American Revolution, and her husband was awarded that spousal pay. So very interesting woman. And this is a statue that we see here. It is outside of the Massachusetts Public Library. Images during this era are very hard to come by. As the last woman I'm going to talk about here is Abigail Adams. This name should sound very familiar to you. She's one of the strongest voiced women during the American Revolution, and very famous for her letters between her and John Adams, her husband. She acted as his political advisor in many ways. It's interesting when studying her is whenever you look at her youth, she was a sickly child, and it allowed her to kind of self-educate really well. She was very well read and had a very strong opinion, and her mother became concerned with her. Mother went to her grandmother and asked, do you think she's going to be okay? I'm worried about this strong opinionated child of mine. And her grandmother assured her that wild colts make the best horses. And I love that quote whenever we look at Abigail Adams, because she was very determined workhorse to push for what she believed in. While John was away attending to the revolutionary issues, she maintained the family, she maintained the business, and in many of John's letters, he did not express any concern. He knew she had that portion of life completely under control. He felt very confident in that. A quote here I have below is from the March 31st, 1776 letter. And I'm not going to read the entire thing. I just want to point out a few things to you. And that is that she expressed her desire that you will remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. She goes on to explain that men could be tyrants if they would be, but they should be cautious of that. And if women aren't remembered, they're going to form a rebellion. They're going to fight back against the suppression that they may be feeling. Moving forward, whenever you're reading through the letters, you come to the June 31st, 1777 letter, in which she describes a scene that she witnesses that women are demanding the keys to the place that a local tavern man keeps the coffee. He was charging ridiculous rates for it, and over 50 women were furious. And when he would not give them the keys, she said these women seized him by the neck. And I like to relate these two things because women wanted some kind of power. Women were not inferior, were not afraid to fight. They were going to fight. So you better remember them when you're making the laws, because they're going to do it anyways. I think that's a very interesting concept. So to conclude here, I think, and what I have read, is that women's role during the revolution was critical. They wanted to have some voice, and they wanted to contribute. And they worked hard to figure out how to do that, whether it was on the home front, whether they dressed as men and joined the army, or whether they spoke politically. Again, this is just 3 women out of many who contributed to the American Revolution. But they are critical when examining this era, whenever looking at the success of the Lastly, here is my bibliography that I used for my slides. I'm also going to be attaching this with my submission. You will be able to click on it and view the actual link itself, especially since sometimes it's hard to read quickly during a multimedia presentation. So thanks so much, you guys. I hope you all did well this semester, and I look forward to seeing what you have accomplished.